Hello and welcome to the Evercade Retreat. Gene Joke here, and today I'm adding 40 winks from the Pico Collection 3 to my ever-growing list where I rank every Evercade game ever. 40 Winks is a 3D platformer released for the PlayStation 1 and developed by Eurocom. Originally it was going to be released on the PS1 and the N64, to the point it was even previewed and maybe even reviewed on the N64, but was never actually released back in the day, although it did get released in around 2018 thanks to a Kickstarter by Pico Interactive. Of course that's not directly relative to this version, which is the PlayStation 1 version, but I mention it because it was previewed and given statements such as "Move Over Mario," which even featured on the cover art and promotional material for the game when it was released on the PlayStation, drawing comparisons to a game that is very well regarded and considered to be the first good 3D platformer. Well, it's bold, isn't it? And in this case it did draw some unfavourable comparisons. But from my own experience with Mario 64, I had an N64 and Mario 64 was one of the first games I got for it, and I got bored. It wasn't the Mario gameplay I wanted. I didn't find it as engaging as the 2D ones, so I never finished that game. But naturally for this review I have finished 40 Winks. But I'm probably not the best person to compare the two because, like I said, I never finished Mario 64. But I will say the controls on 40 Winks aren't as good as they are on Mario 64, but they're not too bad if you're playing with an analog stick. I do find on a D-pad they do feel a little bit awkward at times. Anyway, that's it for the Mario 64 comparisons, so let's talk about the game in its own right. It has quite a charming setup with two children being told a bedtime story when they can't sleep, and it inspires some sort of nightmares. They have to go into the dream world, save the Winks to save dream world or something. There's a bad guy and his henchman Threadbare, a worn out teddy bear. Seeing as it was a later era PlayStation 1 game, coming out I think it was 1999 or 2000, the cutscenes are well done for PS1 and the presentation as a whole is very good. Graphically the game is rock solid. It's a very good looking 3D platformer for the PS1. On the gameplay front it is very much like Mario 64. You have your hub world and your sort of sub-hub worlds, and you collect items to open doors to access other areas, collect things, beat the boss, and so on and so forth. It absolutely is aping Mario 64 in many ways, but the platforming never really gets to the highs of Mario 64, and I can say that as someone who hasn't finished it, because I do remember some bits which had some tricky and some quite fun platforming sections, and also some quite frustrating ones, and 40 Winks is an easier game. The platforming is generally a bit more bog standard. It can be fairly combat heavy in places and the combat is functional, but it could be tighter, that's for sure. It does definitely get easier when you have the various power-ups or other identities, which you get from time to time from Jack-in-the-Boxes. These work on a timer and occasionally you'll pick up items which will extend the timer. When that timer runs out you revert to your basic form. Speaking of basic forms, you can choose to be either Rough or Tumble, the brother and sister from the game. They play pretty much identically. There's almost no difference to the gameplay, although some sections are for boys or girls only. The costumes you get will allow you to access other areas, or in some cases they're necessary for you to complete a level or a section of the level. Honestly, it's an absolutely solid 3D platformer, although many people might find the camera can be a little bit annoying, at least in comparison to more modern 3D platformers. There's definitely a sense of it being a bit of a collectathon, as is standard for 3D platformers, and for the most part that's fine, although there are times when it can be a little bit annoying. To reach the boss on each world, you have to collect all the dream keys from the levels, and they can be hidden, so you might have to play through levels multiple times to find all the dream keys, which I found a little bit annoying on the water heavy world. The swimming in this game isn't great. The bosses in each world are all fairly straightforward. They're not overly complicated, they're pretty much gimmick bosses. They're fun enough. This is a kids game after all. I suppose you wouldn't expect too much of a challenge, although some kids games do very much present a challenge and they're loved despite that. Anyway, I haven't talked about the audio yet, have I? The sounds in the game are fine, can't think of anything wrong or particularly irritating with the sound effects. I actually really like the music, it really helps the mood of it, as the game does feature heavily into whole dreamscape type things or things that kids might dream about. It has a really good atmosphere to it, it's really quite charming. Although the music isn't memorable, it really does suit the game. To be perfectly honest, if this is a platformer I played as a child, I would have really enjoyed it. Playing it now, I can still find the fun in it, but I'm not a huge 3D platformer fan, but I can safely say this is my favourite 3D platformer on the Evercade. Or at least it is at the moment. I still haven't finished Glover, but what I've played of it, I wasn't quite as impressed with it as I have been with this game. And yeah, it did genuinely impress me, at least in the context of it being a 3D platformer for the PlayStation 1, because it seems like many people, myself included, didn't find this game to be much of a draw for Pico Collection 3, and it took me a long time to get around to playing it properly and giving it a good go. My expectations were rather low, but it surpassed them in every way. But then again, it's not hard when your expectations are for it to be a distinctly mid game. But having played it through, I can safely say it is a good 3D platformer. Not an amazing one, not an overly challenging one. Actually, there is a challenge to it. The racing sections that are optional on each level, they do get very challenging. But again, you don't have to do those. The rest of the game is fairly easy, aside from the collecting thing. Again, that's very manageable by playing through them multiple times. So if you are into 3D platformers and you don't mind them just being good rather than exceptional, you could certainly do worse. To place it on my overall ranking list of every Evercade game ever, I would place it above Thunder Hoop but below Area the Acrobat 2. And I honestly can't tell if I've ranked that a bit high or a bit low. Actually no, I don't think I've ranked it too low. It might be a bit high, but the game did certainly speak to the child in me. Anyway, I'm not sure if that might seem a bit high, but as there really aren't many 3D platformers on the Evercade at the moment, it feels a little bit refreshing against the multitude of shoot 'em ups, beat 'em ups and 2D platformers. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.